Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Danny Cruz realm. Danny Cruz here, and along with me, I am happy to present Leah Wald and Robin Nordling.
You got it.
And here in the realm, we're gonna start learning and developing our intuitions, our self worth, our inner being, and one of the key factors that we must learn to realize is to start removing the word taboo from the word death. And we're going to get into all of that and to all the teachings. Myself, my background is Theravada Buddhism, and I have an extensive amount of knowledge, and I'm going to start breaking down that knowledge into the technicalities that run parallel even with religion. So I'm not trying to create divide. What I'm trying to do is show how they actually work together in parallel formats. And so we're going to go within history, we're going to go within teachings and sacred teachings that will help you understand, the why am I here or why is this happening, and learning how to remove the selfishness even when our loved ones pass on. So, without further ado, I'd like to again introduce Leah first, and I'd love to hear some of your background in spiritualism.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us, Danny. We both went to Catholic school growing up, and then as my life progressed, I guess I just was always interested in kind of more of the truth and more of the general picture. I was always into kind of more like the more natural foods, natural medicines, that kind of thing. So um, yeah, just always like kind of on a quest to find the truth of it all. So I guess that's where that's led me.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Robin. So happy to be here with Danny today. Beautiful sunny day. My background, I started off a really happy kid and had a great life and got derailed due to some complications with an injury. Well, we can talk about that some other time. But that really got me to question what I was. I kind of had crisis of identity, right? So the things I attached to were no longer mine. Um, I had to let go of them, and that's what led me to a deeper understanding of what God could be in my life and the truth behind the source of where we all come from and what truly binds us all. So yeah, I've exposed myself to a lot of different teachings. Catholic school was great. Learned a lot of structure and exposed myself to the polaristic viewpoint of perception, and it's an amazing teaching tool. But that's what we're looking to transcend here with Danny and through his learnings and teachings to see that there's another level of consciousness that can exist here on Earth. And this is what we're here to share with everyone.
Excellent. And you brought up a really good point, which actually will lead us into, as I mentioned, the taboo word of death. And there is a conscious that goes on beyond, even with here we are in the now, in our vessels, but also as we, evolve and transition from our vessel to spirit. And so the subject that I'd like to touch on today, and this is it, we're gonna it's in depth, and so where I'd like to start off by reading is, the subject of death being taboo. And even in death, we dress up corpses as if they are healthy and alive. We lie to the children And for example, grandma has gone for a long holiday, or they're sleeping, right? And in the developed world, modern medicine, we make belief that death can be conquered. The rich we are, or the richer we are, and the more we believe that the conquest appears more probable, most of the time we hear or read about death of other people with whom we have no close relationship or we do not know them at all. And most of us have not even really sat down to contemplate our own death. And even if we consider the impending death of the one dearest to us, it is not quite the same. And to face and confront our own death is a very healthy exercise, but few of us very rarely exercise it. And so we'll get into this a little bit later on in the teachings, but just to kind of get others prepared, and those who have read my work already will start to really kind of come back and understand the G plan, because that is a very important role with where we're at today within ourselves. And it's how it all, we constructed that plan before we even entered our vessels. Therefore, we were spirit prior to our vessel, and then when the vessel expires, we go back into spirit. That's the whole general meaning or visual in simplest terms for spiritualism. And death is like a shadow. We cannot shed it off, and if we can live life with the comfortable, the companion of it, is only then when we can actually begin to live. And after all, we're the only ones that fix our own date of death, and that again is within our G plan. And from there we go into the spirit world. So there's no amount of superstition or avoidance can even alter that date. And unless one has just embarked on a monumentous project which will benefit hundreds of thousands of people, that date remains fixed. So it doesn't matter how great of an individual we can become or less, there's just no avoiding it whatsoever. And some people, like the original elite, for some reason they have this belief that they can. And it's unfortunate that the kind of acts that they brought against humanity is evidently clear of what they're trying to do. And the whole, but where we got to kind of bring ourselves back into grounding is understanding it's a biological process, just with human life or humanity as itself. And so we have to start looking within ourselves and diving within ourselves and understanding the processes, the functions of our body, right? And this would then lead us into auras and chakras, and then understanding soulmates and so forth. So what else I'd like to hear your feedback and as to why maybe humans fear death so much.
Well, I think there's the construct of what we've been taught. I mean, for thousands of years, there's just been an indoctrination of fear, right? And so we're taught to fear so many things, and there's distraction upon distraction to keep us from knowing our truth. So that can be fearful. I feel like if you can dive in and find those truths within yourself, it leads to, then death is, like you were saying, we are just the body, or the body is, we're so much more than just the body. We are our soul. So if we can understand all of this, like all of it across the board, then there's just less fear. There's less fear attached. We can just accept it, right?
Yes, and it's important to understand which part of us feels fear. What are we holding on to? And what is the root of the fear? It's okay to be afraid of things, but that can control you if you don't understand why you're afraid of those things. Um, so I believe if we reframe our perception of what fear is and seek to benefit from it, seek to pull on that thread, that will be the revealing of our truth. Um, and if you're fearing terminality, which is a limited amount of time, well, at that moment of death, why would you be worried about a transition? Or why would you be worried or fretful or anxious at the end of that if what you have done is your truth? If you completed your tasks, why would that transition induce fear? So I believe the root of our fear is if we truly want to question that inside and find our personal answer, is to say, what would I regret not doing? Did I live my truth? And those are the scariest questions to ask. So fear of death is camouflage. And when we try to peer into that, that's where we're going to see a picture develop, kind of like a 3D image. It isn't in the lines and the colors. It's in the energy. It's in the understanding. So the word itself has a negative connotation, when really fear is what protects our children from the environment. We're afraid of something happening to them. Without that sense of fear, maybe our children would get injured a lot more frequently as little infants, and we might have a way higher death rate. So to explore something is to shine a light on it from both sides. And that's how we understand our version of it. So the death, the shadow that exists amongst the idea and thoughts of death. Why is a shadow something that we're afraid of? Why aren't we comfortable in our darkness? And that's when I think the truth of the individual's fear, where that lies, will come out. I think it's going to be very specific to the individual.
Yeah, definitely. Just like I mentioned, and as you were saying, it's a biological process, and the world has installed it to be feared, and really, we need to start looking at it as to not be feared, but to embrace it, that it's actually the beginning, right? It is birth. Death is actually birth. And for example, animals, right? Animals do not possess an ego, and they only live in the present, right? And they do not, foresee a future either. And so that's highly, highly critical. Being within one and being within yourself is also highly critical, because if we start analyzing using our mind, which is ego, it definitely pulls us astray from, within, right? And so, what leads us to all these thoughts, and even into people into their final days of coming into death, it brings up five major categories that even Dr. Elizabeth Ross has mentioned, and she has, done a lot of studies on humans in their passing. And so I think even with spiritualism, if we take a look at some of the studies that have been actually done through paranormal studies, that it can help validate exactly what's happening with us, and with what's happening with us when we're coming into those days of death or birth, right? Will only people begin to understand. And that's what I would like to start doing is helping shed light. And so I think that if we look at it as in a psychological manner, that we're going to start noticing the 5 stages of death. And those 5, it starts out with denial, right? Shock. So this would, for example, people that just find out they're at like stage 4 cancer, for example, right? Or other type of illnesses. We naturally go into a shock. And then there's the anger, the emotion. And anger, as we know, comes from confusion. So the word anger is the sub form to confusion. And then we start finding ourselves bargaining and asking questions all along the way, starting with why I'm here or what can I do and to help reverse what's happening to me. And because they're not looking to look within themselves and, and even prior, and that's what's actually important today is to really start looking at ourselves now before, sickness comes around. Because if there is karma, for example, that needs to be corrected, then it needs to be corrected. And it has to be changed, because if not, then we fall into the stage 4, which is depression. And that also has a major impact. And that can either speed up the vessel's life force to end, or you can work at it and prolong it, even though, as we just stated, that death is inevitable. But at least what you're doing spiritually will then allow you to move into the spirit realm in better circumstances versus, in religion they would say hell, right? And so, but those that are acting soulless, well, we know where they go. They're going to be going straight to hell. And then finally, in our 5th, which is in your last, this is your final days, right? We're looking at in the time frame of, with the last month to the last 5 days before the transition actually happens. And so the first stage, when we start looking at the denial and isolation of it all, the shock of the news of the terminally illness that that drives the patient into that loneliness and guilt. The shock will interact and return naturally, or retire. It'll retire itself. And sorry, I do have a couple of notes that I wanted to get collected here. And
Because fear perpetrates disease.
Sorry, what's that? You're kind of coming a little quiet there.
Fear perpetrates disease, right? And so the more we can accept it, or the sooner we can accept it, then it's not going to sit in our bodies.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's just so important. It's, I would much rather go through some really hard things now and work on that acceptance now and have more of a stable and feel that joyful, blissful life, not because I'm walking around with butterflies and unicorns, but because I've really accepted that deep, on a soul level, deep pain. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And then when we start looking at ourselves as that first part in denial, and as time goes, the person will kind of start to look at, it's fight or flight kind of details. But generally, the most natural way is they want to have a happier life, right? They come into that self-realization. They really want to start correcting things within. And so the mind, the ego, everything just starts kind of going in whirlwinds and tunnels. And so there's a lot that needs to get sorted out. And then as it goes, and it becomes complicated because there is no real sense of being within, we then it motivates and transitions into anger, right? And so, you know, when we go through all this, it's really easy to start reflecting on as to, you know, actually it's actually a really difficult moment, like to help show people how they transition. It's just one of those things. It naturally happens because of the emotion, right? And all the reflection of emotion. And so when we, you know, when we're in our quite natural self, right, and someone who has been stricken down, and they start questioning themselves with their careers, their connections with friends and whatnot, and they put on those types of blinders, and they forget what kind of questions to ask themselves. And they actually start making things unfair to them, right? And so then they start thinking, well, is there a God, right? Do I go to heaven? Am I going to go to hell? Or, what happens? And so this they they transition from that anger, and then they start moving into that next state, which would, be the bargaining stage, because they're going through all these processes within, and it's such a complicated tornado, right? And so if we kind of use as an example like a patient who has cancer, right? It's one of the most talked about things that media uses and the medical industry uses on the people to, keep their bankrolls going, but at the same time installing fear. And so if we look at it, then the patient, that is terminally ill, they start to realize, that this is all true, and it's now inevitable in denying it, and that anger still displays, but doesn't help their situation. And so, like a child, can one postpone the inevitable if he or she behaves like that, or within themselves? And can one learn to be pain free, right? And so, can God wait until his son is married? Or if he goes to church every week, and, the whole spiritual process comes into play, and they get even more lost. And
Yeah.
so, as they're creating all these different bargainings, right? So, the bargaining pleas are either made in secret, or they'll do it in private, like, say, with a priest, or, in a church, or have a priest come to their home. And then they start wondering, well, if I, do this with my body, if I donate parts of my body, does that help get me into heaven? Does that buy my way? Or does it, you know, these good deeds, what do they do? And it when they don't really get to examine, or because they haven't examined themselves already prior, usually a lot of the people, they'll go into a state of depression too. And so, again, if we look at, chemotherapy as, like, say, the fourth stage, right? And doing radiotherapy, the patient realizes that he or she is getting weaker and they're not able to function as well anymore. It becomes a lot harder, right? Because radiation is depleting the healthy cells, and then also at the same time killing a virus, but or not a virus, but the cancer that's within, right? And so now that actually kind of splits and becomes two different types of depression, which then makes it emotionally and mentally harder for them to learn how to escape and remove those fears from within. And so, as they, you know, to elaborate more on the second type of depression, which is actually more the preparatory stage for the final outcome. Okay. Again, they think back to themselves about, is he not, like losing a job, not being able to function well with around family and friends, and they start losing control of everything, right? And so then they start really questioning themselves, and now they're looking at that their whole life has been meaningless, and it's been a meaningless journey. And so all these, when we're going through the five, like these 5 steps, the types of depression cannot be erased by the usual encouragement and cheerfulness. And so this depression is a silent one, and the patient wants time and space to plan out their demise. It is better to not be garrulous, but holding of a hand or stroking of the hair or sitting quietly with the patient is a correct approach. And he might ask for a prayer, or she might ask for a prayer, or to read some passages from, favorite books or poems, or even the Bible, for example. And then it has to be done carefully, because you don't want to and send different intentions and energies, or create a manifestation that leads them astray, where the path is to actually help them transition and move towards into the spirit realm peacefully and without much confusion. And so that, I believe, is where a lot of teaching needs to be elevated to the human, so they understand that death is not to be feared, but to help guide and to guide people moving forward, because the transition does happen. So I don't know if there's something you'd like to touch on there. I know I kind of mumbled jumbled a little bit, but
That was great, Danny. You really brought us through really well, and the point that that shift that occurs during those 5 stages, we start to understand where our consciousness is and what parts of us are experiencing the denial, where the depression, where we feel bad, because the denial's in the mind, and it's someone telling you you're not in control. Your health is creating circumstances that are going to affect you. And when being faced with that idea that, what, I'm not aware of what's going on in me, I don't have control of that, things can happen to me that I can't defend myself against, that brings to the forefront that we are under ego consciousness. And what a terrible tragedy to experience that for the first time, when you're faced with a terminal illness, or your timeline is coming to a close. Mm-hmm. How terrible to have spent your whole life in your ego. So this, to me, is the most exciting topic of all. This is the route to freedom within. Through going through these stages and allowing them and admitting that you're feeling them, it allows that transition to occur. The anger, it starts to draw you out of the mind, out of the denial, into the emotions. And when you're in the emotional state, you're now feeling more. You're feeling what you've missed in life. You're feeling what you still want to do. It's no longer an idea that if someone challenges it, well, you can judge them, put them in a category, and acknowledge it or not. It's black or white, 0 or 1. There's no emotion attached to it. So it's easy to put off those ideas until they threaten you, or threaten a lack of control or loss of control in your life. So going with that, it's educational to go through this. I've been blessed to go through this experience.
Essentially, the death of the ego.
Yes, it was the death of the ego, and a physical experience of death, feeling it coming. There is a lot of anger in that moment. The lack of control. I experienced a vaccine injury. I had a really bad reaction to my MMR, mumps, measles, rubella booster shot in 1997. I identified, I was ego personified. I loved my physical self. School was easy. Everything came naturally to me. I was one of those naturals. My brother was 3 years older, so
Yeah.
I had a good trainer, right? So things were easy as I came along. But I didn't know God. We were attending a Catholic school, and I had nothing but doubt and suspicion. It didn't sync with me. It didn't vibrate with me, being in a house of what I felt was judgment. And even being in an Anglican church when I was very young, the teachings that were delivered by the pastor, the preacher, it made me feel like I was worthless. That in God's eyes, I was nothing, and I was wrong, and I needed to prostrate myself and accept benevolence from above if he was gracious enough to give it to me. And the kids that I was in Sunday school with, they were right there with everything, and they were captured by the Spirit. And I couldn't be. I felt like an outsider. So that brought questioning in right away in my path of, if I'm feeling this going into a church, does that mean that I'm not good inside? So at a really early age, I started to look at myself from the bottom up, not just the top down. So I think that was my preparation in dealing with what I dealt with as a 14, 15-year-old with the vaccine injury. Paralysis in the arm for about 2 weeks. I didn't understand what was going on. No one told us about reactions. Call your doctor if something happens. That's not normal. I just figured the nurse must have hit a nerve. So hopefully it'll come back. Eventually it did, but I got really, really ill. Doctors would just say, oh, it's the drop dead flu. I'm like, okay, what's that? So I'm going to expect to die? And they're like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, well, the flu isn't going on. It's springtime. What the hell is going on? So that was that. I lost control. I lost control of my bowels, my legs, my muscles, my nervous system, my pain receptors, my ability to produce melatonin, serotonin, endorphins. I couldn't sleep anymore. I was in insomnia. So I gradually, day by day, experienced a death of the physical body and everything I attached my ego to in this body. And it got so bad that at a point I realized I am nothing that I believed I was previously. And that brought me to the ultimate question. And that is what we get to after, in that second stage of depression, is, okay, I
am nothing.
Yeah, if what this isn't important, and if I'm connected to something bigger, if there's something bigger, what is that? And where is my part in that?
Yeah.
That was the first time in my life I actually opened my consciousness, my heart to God. One night, I had to give up. It was too painful to continue. And the very idea that this would be my reality into my 20s, into my 30s, I wasn't functioning as a human. I was a vampire in my basement. I couldn't go out in sunlight. Migraines from everything. So experiencing, yes, the physical death, and then we'll talk about it another time.
Yeah, for sure.
We
And
talk about divine interventions, but there was an actual experience of
yeah.
yes, this is going to be my moment. But really, it's when we open our heart up to the idea that if we're not in control, who is? And if
Mm-hmm.
they are, what is my plan?
Mm-hmm.
So we now have a new light to see ourselves from within, and it goes beyond the dualistic perception of the ego.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes a gift if you survive this.
Yeah. And then that's where, now if we go on to the other side, so let's say the person looking at the other, I think what also needs to be acknowledged is that when the person who is, in their final days, but also for the person that is there with that person that's going into their final days, what's a very key thing is to learn and understand is that to be with them in that exact moment and to understand the fifth stage, right? The acceptance, and to pick up on that vibration, and even though the vibration is getting weaker, but to be able to learn how to tap into that, right? And when patients, for example, that are in their final days, and when I say patients, I mean, the everyday person, because they're going through the medical system, and that's all by the means of that intention for that word. But the person that is coming to that end, they've now learned to accept, right? And with the help and understanding with medical profession, he's not angry, or he or she won't be angry anymore. That depression, all of that, all those other previous four stages, disappear, and that they do become tired and weak, and you know like the reverse situation of a newborn baby, right? And so both parties, or both entities, so the one passing and the one there, or individuals there, are starting to learn to accept that journey, that transition, because the spirit is getting ready to start leaving the body. And if people really know what to look for, they'll be able to actually see the spirit start leaving. And sometimes it starts at the head chakra. The spirit, you can start seeing it actually hovering right over the face, within inches to up to 3 feet. And so, and peace really starts settling in. But also then for the people there, they become selfish because they're not being able to see that spirit anymore, right? And that's how we have to look at things, is that our vessel is the vessel, but learning to see through the vessel and communicate with spirit is also very, very key in how we move forward, with entities that we connect with, right? And so with the person passing, the peace becomes greater, and they start learning that there is no pain, and whatever they were struggling is over, and they know spiritually that this is their final rest, and it's their flight. They're waiting to catch their flight, going into the spirit realm. And sometimes they're not aware, depending on how fast, like say if someone was to be murdered, or there was a freak accident, they're gonna have no clue what just happened, because they actually didn't even go through the 5 stages. It was just something instant. And so but some of the key factors for people to kind of pick up on is that the last 5 days of a person or a loved one that is getting ready to transition and pass on, to really start taking note at what they say, and what is being said by the person passing, Okay. And one of the key factors is when they start saying, who are all these people there? And let's just say there's a couple people there. But when they start saying things, who are all these people? Ask them to elaborate, because that's your key intel and insight to the spirit realm. Meaning they're able to see their third eye, the crown chakra, the communication that's happening through all their chakras. The third eye is open, and that goes with our silver cord. The communications are taking place already. And this is why in that fifth stage, they become relaxed and, they're ready to go, right? But yet they'll fight it because there's maybe a couple of things that still need to be said or done to a loved one before they go. And in closing, on my sharing of us for dying unto death, is that embrace the love and to really strengthen your love as they're in their final days, right? Really embrace that and learn to connect, because they will come back and they will show you that they're back. They will communicate with you, and it's highly important to embrace that, because it will come from a loving place, right? So any final words and touches you guys would like to add? We have about a couple minutes left here. So
Each stage, it's really easy to say, oh, I just want to get to acceptance, but each stage we shouldn't, I guess, divide them into good or bad either. If we seek to see what is the benefit of learning from exposing myself to that denial, I think the death process and being there with a loved one has so much to teach us. And within our culture, if we can change our ideas and our thoughts about it, and welcome back things like the initiatory rites, so we get to help each other through these processes, we can all really grow, and prevent a lot of pain that's carried into maybe a next version of self, right? So we can really close that book at the end and be happy with what we wrote in it.
yeah, definitely. And that's I just wanted to quickly reflect on that is, so if we kind of look at things backwards, so if we understand that we're going to be relaxed and calm and happy at the end, so let's say stage 5, and work backwards, if we start doing that now and teaching each other that now, this very profound knowledge, then when the time comes, then all the dark matter and energy that people actually bring to the person who is transitioning, it becomes more brighter and loving and caring, instead of sadness and hurt and negativity. So it's a very big thing that we need to do, is to really start having those conversations with ourselves and start looking within and developing and having those conversations as well with family and friends, right? Because then you know how to help those transitions become that much more easier, and the having faith in what happens next becomes that much easier. So, but we'll get more into that in the next episode. Thank you everyone for joining us here at the Danny Cruz Realm. Hit the like and subscribe button on the video. As you see it will resonate with you, please do. Thank you so much. God bless you all. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and we'll see you again here soon. Have a great day, everybody.